Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth, Act 3, Scene 1. Okay, so the scene begins with our friend Banquo. Banquo is musing upon everything that has happened so far, recognising that Macbeth has actually got everything the witches said that he was going to get. But rather than just think, oh, hey-ho, he actually worries and wonders whether or not Macbeth has done something bad. So his suspicions are mounting. And whilst his suspicions are mounting, Macbeth is starting to plot because he also has this real sense of fear, a fear of Banquo and the witches' prophecies, what they said about Banquo's sons being king, what they said about Banquo's sons being king, about him being greater. So what seems to be a quite friendly conversation between him, Banquo and Lady Macbeth, is actually one of plotting and scheming. He's finding out when he's going riding, what time he'll be there, being quite duplicitous, saying, oh, you know, our feast is so important tonight, make sure that you're there. But then actually, by the end of the scene, having thought through what he wants to do, he actually arranges for Banquo to be killed by murderers. So not great, really. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look at Macbeth's soliloquy and then a little bit of the conversations with the murderers to sort of see how his character has developed over the last two acts. So let's get cracking with this soliloquy. So he begins, "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus." So we've got the repetition of the word thus here, and thus in this case means to be king. So he's now saying to be king is only worthwhile if you know that you're king and you're safely king. So immediately he's starting to worry about whether or not he is going to be able to sustain his kingship. He uses this metaphor of a knife or a weapon. He says our fears in Banquo stick deep. So this idea that it cuts him all the way through, quite a violent metaphor, slightly ironic in tone because of what he's saying about Banquo and the fact that the two of them, well, he's the murderer, not Banquo. So he says that Banquo has this royalty of nature that reigns in him. So what if you have a little look at these two words? So you've got royalty of nature, and then you've got the verb reign. So words to do with majesty, regality. He is like a king, and that's what he should fear. He also talks about Banquo being so very courageous. He has a dauntless temper of his mind. So just like Macbeth, he's also incredibly valiant and full of courage. However, he also has a wisdom that does guide his valor to act in safety. So a little bit of personification here, saying that that bravery of his is guided by intelligence. So the intelligence is actually in charge. So that means that he's not going to be impulsive. That means that he's always sort of in charge of his reason and rationality, perhaps somewhat different to Macbeth. He says, there is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked, as it said Mark Antony's was by Caesar. That's a little bit difficult. Don't worry about it too much. Genius in this case means guiding spirit, kind of like a guardian angel. And this here is actually a little bit of allusion. It's intertextual allusion because he's making reference to a line in Antony and Cleopatra, one of his other plays, where basically Mark Antony goes to see a soothsayer, someone who can tell the future, and asks who's going to be more powerful, him or Caesar, and he says Caesar. So the comparison or the allusion being used here is that he's saying, if I stay close to Banquo, perhaps my spirit guide won't be as strong as his and he will end up being king. So quite a wordy little explanation there, but it's about whether or not he will be able to maintain his status if he still has Banquo around him. Oh, sorry, there's significance of the illusion. Right, now we've got this little shift in tone. You'll notice here we've got caesura, just here after the allusion to Antony and Cleopatra. So he chid the sisters when they first put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. So notice how we've now kind of gone more into like storytelling. It's shifted back to him actually thinking about what happened. And he's thinking to himself, well, hang on a minute. He also really wanted to know what they had to say as well. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him father to a line of kings. So actually, this is Macbeth's greatest fear. This is Macbeth's greatest worry, that it doesn't matter that he's king now. It's the idea of Banquo being the father to kings. There's longevity in that. And some of you may remember from previous videos that at the time they believed that Banquo was a descendant of King James I. Sorry, wrong way around. King James was a descendant of Banquo. And so this idea of the longevity of Banquo's line is really important, because if we were to believe what they did, it would go all the way to where they are now, beginning of the 17th century, with King James on the crown. And now we get to the heart of his concerns. He says, upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my grip. So these metaphors here, the fruitless crown and the barren sceptre, it's all about these adjectives, fruitless and barren, okay, which suggest infertility. He's making reference to the fact that he and Lady Macbeth do not have a child. He might also be making reference to the fact that any child that they did have obviously died. So he's saying that the crown is meaningless, yeah, if he doesn't have someone to pass it on to. And there's a real irony here, because he says, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. And, you know, the irony there is that I know that he is technically lineal, because, you know, he is the next in line after Malcolm and Donalbain. But if anyone has been doing the wrenching of the rightful, you know, throne, it's Macbeth. And obviously, yeah, you've got the connotations of that verb and the kind of violence of it. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. Issue means sons. So for Banquo's children have I defiled my mind. Note the connotations of that verb, defiled. It suggests corruption. So he knows that he has tainted himself forever. But the problem is that he's not done it for any sort of lasting legacy, because it will all go to Banquo's sons. For them, again, the children, the gracious Duncan have I murdered. Okay, so yeah, he does seem to be feeling regret here, but regret and remorse are slightly different things. Just because he's feeling a bit of regret does not mean that he's feeling guilty, because at the moment the issue is not about what he did, it's about the fact that he doesn't have an heir. That seems to be the only reason he's got this sense of regret. And this regret, I think, is then developed in the metaphor. He put rancours in the vessel of my peace only for them. Note the repetition of them down here as well. So this is this metaphor here is about poisoning your own drink, so drinking from your own poisoned cup. And note the noun of my peace. So again, he recognises that his sense of peace and safety and comfort has been corrupted. He has poisoned himself. It goes back to the idea of Macbeth having murdered sleep. He has removed the peace from his world. And then mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man. This is really punchy stuff. Mine eternal jewel is a metaphor for his soul. So if he has given his soul to the common enemy of man, he's saying he has given his soul to the devil. That's who the common enemy of man is. And why has he done it? To make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. That metaphor there expressed in an exclamative, the seed of Banquo kings. It's like he's weighing up all of the awful things he's done and then saying, God, I've not even done it for myself. I've done it for someone else. I've done it for Banquo's children. And then here we have this idea about his sort of like final thoughts here, rather than so rather than that be the case, come fate into the list. and champion me to the utterance. So there's a little bit of hubris here, because he seems to be sort of like challenging fate to a fight, like he'd be able to win. But what he is saying is, I need intervention. I need a way of stopping this. The utterance is combat. Champion me to combat. There is another interpretation here that he's calling upon fate or fortune, which would be quite interesting, because obviously in Act 1, Scene 2, he disdained fortune. He didn't need things like luck and chance and fate on his side. He was enough, whereas now that doesn't seem to be the case. So that's the soliloquy scene through. Let's just move on and have a little look at the scene with the murderers. Okay, so Macbeth is able to actually manipulate the murderers. Whether or not they need manipulating, I don't know, because they're murderers for hire, but he seems to feel that he does. And so one of the things that he does is that he says, it was he, Banquo's in the times past, which held you so under fortune, which you thought had been our innocent self. So these guys have been hired to do the murdering. Macbeth has obviously messed them around in the past, held you so under fortune, so kept you in your low position. So actually, in the past, Macbeth has been unfair to them, but he is blaming Banquo for that. So that's one way of manipulating the murderers to get them to do his bidding. He also says, and this is really troubling, are you so gospel to pray for this good man and for his issues, whose heavy hand has bowed you to the grave and begged you forever? So he's like, oh, I didn't realise you were that religious, that you would actually turn the other cheek and pray for a man who's sort of kept you so kind of low in status all this time. So this is quite blasphemous. He's using religious reasoning, but as a justification for them killing someone. So really, really problematic for the audience there. And then we also have Macbeth manipulating the murderers here, saying, if you're not in the worst ranks of manhood, say it, and I'll put that business into your bosom. Now, this is quite clever, because he's basically saying that only people who aren't in the worst ranks of man are able to take this job. So if they say no to the job, that's them saying, oh, I'm in the worst ranks of man. So in order to justify that they are not the worst, he's making them carry out a murder, making them, you got it, the worst of mankind. So he's being highly, highly manipulative in this moment. It's weird, isn't it? You start being like, oh, the poor murderers. Seems wrong. Okay, moving swiftly on. Okay, so what we have here is just this little moment. Again, he's still talking to the murderers. And I want you to think about his own power. So is he mine, and in such bloody distance that every meaning of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. And though I could with bare-faced power sweep him from my sight and bid my will avouch it, yet I must not. So he sees his power as so huge and monumental that it could obliterate a man. He's saying, I have the power to do that, to sweep him from my sight. Note that lovely sibilance there in that bit of hyperbole. But he also understands something else about leadership, and that is that he has certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop. So he's saying, yes, I am king. I am so powerful. I can do whatever I want. Except they've got to be conscious of the people that are going to be looking at me, because they view him as so very important. So he does understand the politics of it all. And so that is why it is that I to your assistance do make love, masking the business from the common eye for sundry weighty reasons. So he's saying, so this is why he has to do it this way. This is why he has to, you know, have the crime carried out by murderers, because he knows that if it was made clear that it was him that had done it, then he would lose his power, because people would recognise what he was up to. Okay, last thoughts for the day. What have we got going on here? Fear. Okay, so if you've got a question on fear, this is a scene that should not be missed, because it is Macbeth's fear of Banquo and fear of the future, or lack of future, that is driving him to make these, let's be fair, poor decisions. Power, massive one. Okay, so this idea of what power means to him and why power isn't actually enough as it is, because it's all about his safety. And of course, betrayal, because he is 100% betraying his friend. You know, it's the second betrayal. You know, we've seen obviously it with Duncan. Now, this is a betrayal that is about anticipating future issues rather than removing. So it's a different kind. Hopefully that was useful to you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, just to make sure that you're getting all of the videos that I am putting together to help you with your studies. If there's anything that you'd like me to produce, please just drop me a little note in the comments and I will see what I can do. But for now, just thank you for watching and happy revising.